Chapter 9. The New Invention.
How many more of these things are we going to need?
Onepu asked as Taipu dragged yet another Bohrok carcass over toward Nuparu's workbench.
There's plenty more if you need 'em,
Taipu said.
That ought to be enough for now,
Nuparu replied.
Thank you, Taipu.
With the help of Onepu and Taipu, Nuparu got to work dismantling the bodies of more than a dozen Bohrok that had been gathered from across the village. The Kana had all been carefully removed and tossed over the heatstone keg, which created a stench so potent it nearly brought the Matoran to their knees. Together, they stripped apart every last piece, laying them out in sorted piles ranging from bones, tubes, plating, and miscellaneous internal components, many of which were significantly damaged. Nuparu sifted through his toolbox, laying out a number of tools he was certain would be utilized, which was nearly all of them.
You've never actually explained what you intend to do with all of this,
Onepu said.
Remember why I was unable to create that exoskeleton?
Nuparu asked in response.
You said you lacked the resources.
Well, not anymore.
So, your plan of escape is to build a machine utilizing the corpses of our enemies?
Yep.
And somehow you believe that is going to work?
Nuparu shrugged.
It's not that I believe it will work. It's just that I haven't been able to think of a reason it won't.
Onepu looked over the sorted piles of dead Bohrok parts.
You are truly and undeniably insane, Nuparu.
Nuparu flashed a genuine smile as he patted Onepu's back.
Thank you, Captain. That means a lot coming from you.
Nuparu stepped toward the piles, kneeling down as he slowly stroked the chin of his mask. He gave a silent glance across every piece. He remained still for nearly a minute before Onepu finally spoke up.
What are you doing?
Nuparu held up his hand, gesturing the captain to remain silent without taking his eyes off the parts.
I'm concentrating. Please give me a moment.
Concentrating on what exactly?
I'm trying to figure out how to go about this.
Oh, this is brilliant. You make us drag these monsters across the village and gut them for the sake of your deranged escape plan, and you don't even know how you're going to—
Okay, I got it.
Nuparu said abruptly as he snapped to his feet.
Taipu, can you hand me my welding gun? It's that big long thing with the stick on the end?
Sure thing, Nuparu,
Taipu said as he sprung to help the engineer. Onepu tugged the sides of his kanohi.
It's all right, Captain. I'm sure you'll wake up any minute now.
He mumbled under his breath as he trudged over to join them. The hours raced by as Nuparu's plan progressed. The progress was littered with failed trials and mishaps, but all of which were corrected and refined, oftentimes within a single adjustment. With every step, Nuparu's mind continued to soak in knowledge and expel a torrent of new ideas. Even as Onepu and Taipu periodically slipped in a few much-needed naps, Nuparu continued working. His energy only seemed to swell with every completed step. With no connection to the outside world among the wrecked village, they could never begin to guess how much time had passed. But to Nuparu, it only felt like a fleeting moment before it was finally finished. Nuparu climbed into the control seat and lowered the protective visor, which had been made from the transparent headplate of a Nuvok. He planted his feet over the pedals at the knees of the machine and pressed downward to control the pistons attached to the giant and elevated feet. At his sides, he gripped two directional control levers, which had been routed to the extendable arms, which rested in a bent crescent shape when idle. At the ends of the arms were bladed hooks harvested from the underside of Galak hand shields. The new invention added nearly 2 feet to the wearer's diminutive height. With the mess of exposed cables along the arms and back and skeletonized appearance making a clear display of the repurposed Bohrok anatomy, it was far from an aesthetically pleasing sight, but one to behold nonetheless. The cavern floor quaked with every step as the creation roared to life. Turning toward his already destroyed home, Nuparu put the machine's power to the test, driving his arm through the wall and shattering it to bits with a single hook. He pulled back on the lever, resetting the arm to its idle position.
Of the many things I've seen throughout my years on this island,
Onepu began.
this is definitely one of them.
Impressed?
Nuparu asked.
Admittedly so.
Good.
Nuparu said as he piloted the machine toward the mountainous pile of smashed rocks and broken stalactites that sealed the main exit toward the surface island.
My work here is finished.
What do we call it?
Taipu asked. Nuparu paused.
I'm an engineer, not a poet. Besides, a practical name will be easiest for these monsters to remember. I call it Boxor.
Nuparu thrust the arm forward, blasting through the solid rock. As he wound back, the hooks tore away the shattered mess, granting him room to proceed smashing through with the other arm. Back on the surface of the island, hundreds of Onumatoran had gathered across the fields of Midak's farmland. Tents were pitched, housing the displaced villagers. Although most elected to stay, many had left seeking refuge in the neighboring Pokoro. Even after Turaga Whenua had returned from his abrupt and previously unexplained departure, now in the company of the chronicler, morale was dreadfully low. Takua had done his best to interview the distraught villagers, collecting accounts of their evacuation, but was unable to unearth much more information than what the Turaga had already given. When not lamenting the loss of their home and possessions, or grieving the deaths of 3 of their own, they were commenting on the foreboding black smoke pillar rising from the southernmost end of the island, which only swelled by the hour. As the sun began to slip away, making way for the 3rd night outside of Onukoro, the villagers were alerted by a distant rumble. A wave of commotion swept through the fields as it grew louder. The Usselry guards worked to quell the murmuring crowd so they could get a clearer study on the source of the noise. They learned the sound was thundering out from the cave. At first, they believed it to be a Kumanui heading to the surface in search for food. That was highly unlikely, as the path to the village had been blocked off by the flood. And the sound was unlike that of Arahi anyway. When the heavy tramping finally reached the mouth of the cave, its source was revealed.
They're alive!
Called one of the Onumatoran, causing a mob to crowd the entrance. Nuparu lifted the visor, hopping out from the seat of the boxer to join Onepu and Taipu in greeting the overjoyed villagers.
Make room for the Turaga!
Ordered an Usselry guard as Turaga Whenua and Takua worked their way through the parting crowd.
I thought you 3 were dead.
The Turaga said as he approached Onepu, Taipu, and Nuparu.
How is this possible?
Although the odds were against us,
Onepu began.
we survived solely through sheer will and determination.
Nuparu built this big machine and he punched through the cave,
said Taipu, pointing to the boxer.
Yes, and that too.
Remarkable.
The Turaga said, taking a step toward Nuparu's creation.
You constructed this from the Bohrok bodies?
Yes, Turaga.
Nuparu replied.
Without the masks inside their heads, they're nothing but spare parts. I decided to put those parts to use.
Your intellect has never ceased to impress me. But this is something else entirely. Takua, this is Nuparu. You said on the way here you had never had a chance to meet him.
No, but I've heard a lot about your ingenuity.
Takua replied as he met Nuparu's handshake.
It's nice to see it in person.
Your reputation precedes you as well, chronicler.
Nuparu replied before turning back to the Turaga.
Fortunately, this only required a fraction of the bodies down there. With a few extra hands and perhaps some better lighting, we could create far more.
For what purpose?
Whenua asked.
To fight back. If the Toa have their hands full, we need the extra power.
You believe this machine is suitable to fight the Bohrok?
If it's not, then I'll learn why and build a better one. Until it is.
I have no doubt. In that case, we'll do whatever we can to provide the resources.
Whenua said before turning to address the gathered villagers.
Let's go home. There is much work to be done.
Turaga Whenua led the way down the long and winding tunnel back to Onukoro, followed by nearly 2,000 Onumatoran villagers that were both eager and slightly daunted to return to what remained of their home. Many carried torches, while others were fortunate enough to possess lightstones. The journey down was polluted by the consistent booming of the boxor's heavy stomps, which were accompanied by the whirring and hissing of its moving parts with every step as Nuparu brought up the rear. He had made it clear that he intended to utilize his creation in battling the Bohrok, but it was unlikely he had planned to use stealth in his tactics, as the machine could be heard from halfway across the Wahi. As the initial shock of seeing their century-old home village in such a sorry condition, the Onumatoran got to work at scavenging resources and repairing what they could. Nuparu collected a team of more than 70 volunteers, including Taipu, giving them a crash course on the proper method of disassembling the dead Bohrok, ensuring they knew to check the Krana before proceeding. Every last Bohrok carcass had been retrieved and brought to the village center, where Nuparu and his team worked to replicate the boxor. They worked diligently, closely following every step of Nuparu's instruction. After hours of tireless labor, the second boxor was completed, nearly identical in every way to the first. A third followed soon after, then a fourth, each one completed faster than the last until the Bohrok parts had been depleted. Meanwhile, Captain Onepu worked with the Usselry to aid the remaining villagers in cleaning up the flood damage. Fearing he would somehow find a way to botch the boxer assembly, Takua chose to help the captain, who was overjoyed to see Puku had been thriving under the care of her new master. As the hours passed by, the somber atmosphere had brightened once the Matoran began finding success in their tasks. The following morning, Takua stood beside the Turaga. They watched as Nuparu completed the final inspection on the fifth newly completed boxer, while the others had already taken off to offer assistance in clearing the debris. Takua had just finished logging the events in the Book of Chronicles.
If I weren't standing here,
Takua said,
I don't think I would have believed it.
All Matoran villages have a speciality that contributes to the life of the island.
Whenua replied.
Ours is our innovation, and no one better represents that than Nuparu.
When I was working with Captain Onepu earlier, I noticed he seemed to carry a bit of resentment toward him. Why is that?
Turaga Whenua sighed.
Onepu is a brilliant warrior and a selfless hero, as he demonstrated during the flood. But he lacks modesty. He tends to believe himself to be the most intelligent one in the room. When it becomes clear that he isn't, he doesn't handle it well. It's partly why he's so fond of Taipu.
So it's just a fragile ego. What does Nuparu think of him?
He couldn't be bothered to care. For years I've thought he would also make an exceptional right hand. Not that I have any intention of replacing Onepu, although I doubt he would ever accept the position, with as much as he already does for the village anyway.
Why didn't you choose him to begin with?
In the earliest days of the island, before we had chosen our right and left hands, I believed that of all the Onumatoran, Nuparu would never be worthy to hold either position. As the years passed, I realized I may have been too hasty in my judgment.
Takua paused, confused by the Turaga's explanation.
Why?
Just then, one of the Usselry guards wearing a deep purple noble huna halted his crab beside them.
Turaga Whenua, you're going to need to see this.
What is it, Kaj?
Follow me.
Turaga Whenua glanced toward Takua before they both followed the Ussel-mounted Matoran. They were led south through the village, still forced to step over the scattered debris that had yet to be removed from the walking paths. Although with access to dry torches and light stones, the village had become significantly easier to navigate.
Thanks to Nuparu's new machines,
Kaj explained as they reached their destination.
we were able to break through the cave-in and regain access to the Likoro Highway.
That's good news. I'm glad we're making such progress.
That's not all, Turaga.
Kaj continued, climbing off his ustle and leading them into the tunnel.
When we opened it up, we had company waiting on the other side.
More Bohrok?
Takua asked. Kaj directed the pair toward the Onumatoran workers gathered up ahead. When they approached, they found two heavily disheveled Limatoran at the center of their attention. With every type of dirt, dust, and grime coating their bodies, Takua almost didn't recognize them, until one of them spoke up as they stepped forward.
Raga Whenua, we crave need your help.